In a small town, there was an old antique shop hidden away on a quiet street corner. The shop was filled with dusty relics, forgotten treasures, and peculiar oddities. Among them was a tall, ornate mirror with a gold frame that seemed to shimmer even in the dimmest light. One evening, a young woman named Emma stumbled upon the shop. She had always loved antiques and couldn't resist stepping inside. As she wandered through the aisles, her eyes were drawn to the mirror. It was beautiful, almost mesmerizing. The shopkeeper noticed her fascination and smiled. "Ah, the Mirror of Souls," he said softly. "Legend has it that this mirror reveals the souls of the departed, trapped within its glass." Emma, intrigued by the eerie story, laughed nervously. "Is that so?" she asked. The shopkeeper nodded. "But beware," he warned. "Once you gaze into it, the spirits may follow you home." Despite the warning, Emma couldn't resist. She bought the mirror and took it back to her small apartment. She placed it in her bedroom, admiring the way it made the room feel larger. That night, as she prepared for bed, she glanced into the mirror. For a moment, she thought she saw something move in the reflection, a shadow, perhaps, or a flicker of light. She dismissed it as her imagination and went to sleep. But the next morning, things began to change. Emma awoke to find her room colder than usual. Her breath hung in the air like mist. She glanced at the mirror and froze. The reflection wasn't right. The room in the mirror was darker, and a faint outline of a figure stood in the corner, barely visible. She blinked, and the figure was gone. Shaken, she convinced herself it was just a trick of the light. But over the next few days, the figure in the mirror became more distinct. It was a woman, pale and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into Emma's soul. Every night the figure grew closer to the mirror's surface, as if trying to escape. Emma's sleep was plagued with nightmares, visions of the woman stepping out of the mirror, her cold hands reaching for Emma's throat. She began to hear whispers at night, soft and unintelligible, but filled with a sense of urgency. One night, unable to bear it any longer, Emma decided to cover the mirror. She draped a heavy cloth over it, hoping that would stop the nightmares. But as she turned to leave the room, she heard a soft, eerie laugh behind her. Emma froze. Slowly, she turned back to the mirror. The cloth had slipped off, and the woman was standing right behind her in the reflection, her eyes locked onto Emma's. Emma screamed and ran out of the room, slamming the door behind her. She called the shopkeeper the next morning. Frantic and terrified, "I need to return the mirror," she said. "Something's wrong with it." The shopkeeper's voice was grave. "I'm sorry, but once the mirror chooses you, there's no escaping it." Desperate, Emma smashed the mirror into pieces, hoping to free herself from the curse. But instead of relief, the room filled with a chilling wind, and the fragments of glass began to move on their own, forming into countless tiny mirrors, each reflecting the ghostly woman's face. Emma's apartment was never the same after that. She moved out, but no matter where she went, she would catch glimpses of the woman in every reflective surface, windows, puddles, even her phone screen. The ghost was always there, watching, waiting, and each time the reflection was a little closer. In a small town, nestled between dense forests and rolling hills, there was an urban legend passed down from generation to generation, the legend of the Midnight Whistler. According to the stories, every few years, someone in the town would hear a strange, eerie whistle outside their window at precisely midnight. The tune was said to be hauntingly beautiful, yet unsettling, and once you heard it, you were never the same again. The legend claimed that the whistle was a warning, a harbinger of something far more sinister to come. No one knew who or what the whistler was, but those who heard the tune were said to disappear within 3 days, without a trace. Some said it was the spirit of a vengeful soul. Others believed it was a creature from the dark woods. But one thing was certain: the midnight whistler was real, and the town knew better than to ignore it. One chilly autumn night, a teenager named Alex stayed up late, studying for an important exam. The rest of his family had gone to bed, and the house was silent. The only sound was the soft scratching of his pencil on paper as he reviewed his notes. The clock struck midnight, and Alex stretched, letting out a yawn. As he sat back in his chair, something strange caught his attention. From outside his window came a soft, melodic whistling, like a lullaby carried on the wind. It was a slow, winding tune, unlike anything Alex had ever heard before. At first, he thought it was just someone walking down the street, but as he listened closer, the whistle seemed to grow louder, yet more distant at the same time. Curiosity piqued. Alex approached the window and peered outside. The street was empty, shrouded in shadows, with no sign of anyone nearby. Yet the whistling continued, now seeming to come from directly beneath his window. His heart began to race, and a cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He remembered the old legend, the Midnight Whistler. His friends had joked about it before, saying it was just a story to scare kids. But now, hearing the eerie tune for himself, Alex wasn't so sure. He quickly shut the window, locking it tight, and pulled the curtains closed, but the whistling continued, growing louder, more insistent. Unable to sleep, Alex stayed awake until the first light of dawn broke through the curtains. The whistling had stopped sometime during the night, but the uneasy feeling remained. He tried to shake it off, convincing himself it was just his imagination, but deep down, he couldn't forget the haunting melody. The next day, Alex told his friends about the experience. They laughed it off, teasing him for believing in old ghost stories. But as the day wore on, Alex couldn't shake the sense that something was watching him, lurking just out of sight. That night, as the clock neared midnight, Alex's unease grew into dread. He tried to keep himself occupied, watching TV, put the volume up loud to drown out his thoughts. But as the clock struck 12, the power went out, plunging the house into darkness. Then the whistling began again, soft at first, but growing louder and closer with each passing moment. This time, it wasn't outside his window, it was inside the house. Alex grabbed his phone and turned on the flashlight, his hands shaking. He crept through the darkened halls, following the sound, trying to find the source. The whistling led him to the front door, which was slightly ajar, swaying gently as though it had just been opened. Suddenly, the whistling stopped, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Alex's breath caught in his throat as he realized something was standing just beyond the threshold, hidden in the shadows. He couldn't see its face, but he felt its gaze locked onto him, cold and unfeeling. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, it spoke. "You heard my song." The next morning, Alex's parents woke up to find the front door wide open and Alex's bed empty. He was never seen again. All that remained was a single note written in Alex's handwriting: "Beware the whistler." Since that night, no one in the town has dared stay awake past midnight, and if they ever hear a whistle in the dark, they know better than to look outside.